Hey everybody, it's Ben. So today on This Legal Life, I'm going to sit down with Alex Su. A lot of you probably know Alex from his LinkedIn or TikTok, but maybe you don't know the backstory about how Alex got to where he was. On this episode of This Legal Life, I sit down with Alex and talk about his clerkship experience, transitioning from big law into plaintiffs' firms, his early struggles starting a law firm, then finding success within sales and marketing within legal tech, really social media during the pandemic, and then eventually building a community and navigating his career transitions all the way up to his work today as CRO at Latitude. It was a fascinating conversation. I loved sitting down with Alex and getting to know him a little better, and I think you will too. Let's go to the episode now. All right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Ben Chiriboga, the Chief Growth Officer here at Nexo, coming to you with another This Legal Life. This Legal Life is where I sit down with professionals around the world and hear, well, basically about their legal life. Today, I am very, very excited to be speaking with Alex Su. Alex is many things, and you probably know him from LinkedIn. You probably know him from TikTok. But today, we're going to hear the story that you don't hear, how he really got there, all about it. But first and foremost, Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm so excited that we get a chance to talk about my favorite topic, which is me.
Yes.
And thank you for inviting me on the show.
Absolutely. So this is an audio podcast, but you right now, I'm looking at a New York cap. You are from New York originally. We're going to talk about New York to California
Yes.
to back, all the rest of it. But, Yankees, of course, big season this year in the MLB. But I always start, rather than just going through your bio and just kind of reading out, I like to start by reading one of the guests' most popular LinkedIn posts. And I'm going to read one of your most popular LinkedIn posts because honestly, I think it says everything. Not really about New York. That was just an aside to just let people know, but really about you specifically. And I'm going to read it out to you. You're going to know because it really popped off. And it had to do with, you started off by saying, you can do anything with a law degree. They always say that, but there are some things that they never tell you. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it was a great post, but, I'm bringing it up because whenever I think about you, I think a lot about these sorts of posts and this kind of content where you sort of are pulling back the idea of what it means to be in the legal industry sort of like today. Is that sort of fair?
That is. I write up on this topic a lot, probably because it mirrors my own journey where when I was younger, I thought being a lawyer would mean certain things. I didn't realize I was going to go into an industry that valued credentials so much or was so conservative and was so unique in so many ways. Like many lawyers, I ended up finding my own path elsewhere. So that was the big story of my career early on. And so that's why I like talking about it, because I know that a lot of lawyers out there are wondering about themselves. Like, do I want to continue practicing? What else can I do? And it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
And that's why I write on it and share my own story. Hopefully that, my own story can give people insight on where they want to head down in their own paths too.
Yeah, totally. That's what this podcast is literally about. It's about your legal life, and we're going to get into that. And people who have listened to this podcast know we're going to take you through the hero's journey, the ups and downs. Everybody in the world goes through this journey, but nobody goes through the same journey in the same way. Just really quickly, before we sort of start the legal journey, and we're going to go back to, I want to take you back to, I think, when your story is interesting, I like to always go back to when you clerked. We're going to get back to that. But one last question about this before we get into that.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's such a hot topic today? You and I both write about this. Why do you think it's a hot topic today, the idea of lawyer is really a starting point, not necessarily the end point today? I think that this is so topical. Whenever you talk about it, it gets so much impressions. Everybody's thinking about what's going on. What's just sociologically zoom out a little bit. What is going on right now, kind of in the whole legal economy, the whole legal industry, that this is such a topical thing?
I think a lot of lawyers are just not happy at their jobs, and there's a lot of root causes to that. Part of it is because people go to law school like I did, with maybe a mistaken idea of what the practice of law is. Maybe some people thought they wanted to be a lawyer, but then got into it and, realized that they had maybe a personality or temperament suited for something else and not practicing law. So I think that that's why it's so hot, because people are always questioning, those of us who are, who have practiced law. We wonder whether we made the right choice. And if not, what else can we do? Mm-hmm. That's been a hot topic, I think, for the last few years. It's certainly been a hot topic for a long time, but especially probably in recent years, because you're starting to see things like the advent of AI. You're starting to see LinkedIn and other social media highlight other paths available to people. So these are all factors that make it a super, super popular topic these days.
I agree, and this podcast is just another media on this whole topic, whether or not you stay within the law or you sort of get out. I think that this media environment is kind of fueling this as well. And I mean, I'm all for it. So let's add some more to the fire with getting into your story. And like I said, we're going to take you back. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning, really clerking for you're gonna correct me on the details, but basically you were clerking for a judicial New York judicial federal judge, I think, at this point in time. You want to take us back there, start the journey around there, because I sort of feel like this is an interesting departure for the introduction to your hero's journey.
Yeah, for sure. I clerked for Judge Edmond Chang in the Northern District of Illinois. It's a federal courthouse in Chicago. I never expected to clerk. I remember applying to clerkships my third year of law school and being rejected from every single one. I mean, they never really actually reject you. They just ignore you and don't give you an interview, which is what happened to me. So I thought, well, on paper, I think it was a long shot for me to get a clerkship at one of these cities, because as your listeners may know, clerking for a federal judge is a pretty competitive process. What I did do, though, was I think somewhere kind of rewind back to my second year of law school. I went to an APALSA event and I met an AUSA, a federal prosecutor. I thought he had an amazing career, and so I kept in touch with him. Little did I know, a year later, he would get nominated to the federal bench by President Obama. And so I immediately sprung into action and was like, hey, would you be interested in hiring me as a clerk? And this was like late in 3L years. So like I had already made plans to go back home to New York and work for a large firm. But it seemed like a great opportunity. The judge, or he wasn't a judge then, he was a prosecutor then, and he said, we still need to get Senate confirmation, so hold on. I'm not quite a judge yet. So I left. I went back to New York, worked at the firm Sullivan and Cromwell in the litigation department. And I think 3 months in, the news came out that he was confirmed by the Senate. And so, the judge then reached back out and said, I was just confirmed. Let's talk. From there, I interviewed, and then within a week or two, I found myself back in Chicago, where I went to law school, back in Chicago, clerking for a newly appointed federal judge. So it was one of the coolest experiences of my life. I really enjoyed that clerkship, and I think I learned so much, both from my co-clerks, my judge, just being that close in that process. But I always say, like, that was not an opportunity that was something I stumbled into or like just applied to and got. It required me to kind of hustle my way in, which was not the typical, I think, experience of most people clerking at the federal level.
Yeah. I asked this because in the hero's journey, the beginning of the hero's journey is always we find the hero basically in their village, in whatever's going on. Think of it like a Frodo. He's just there living his life, doing his thing. Luke Skywalker just kind of going, building different droids and hanging out with droids. But there's always something lingering, and typically there is a outside as well as an internal sort of push that kind of springs the hero into action, basically. Let's go to Sullivan and Cromwell. You're back in New York. You're somewhere in between 1, 2, 3, and 4 years. Tell me about whether or not there is this looming sort of sense about adventure might be around the corner. Was there any sort of exterior or interior? I think you've talked a little bit about maybe senses of identity. What's going on in this in between? Because, it's interesting because you go into a clerkship, very exclusive, and then within about 5 years, you're basically out of law. That's a big shift, and I'm interested in what's lurking underneath that sort of kicks off this hero's journey.
Yeah, no, it was definitely not part of the plan. So I went back to S&C New York after my clerkship, and I very quickly realized like this was not the job for me. I remember being staffed on a large litigation matter, watching a partner be responsible for going through a priv log. And I was thinking, wow, there's this highly credentialed, very intelligent, highly polished law firm partner at Sullivan and Cromwell. And his job is to essentially make sure the formatting on Excel spreadsheets are correctly done. There was just a moment there where I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to work towards. There were hints in my past where I thought, maybe working at a law firm might not be a good fit, but that kind of opened my eyes to think I need to do something different. And I wasn't sure what that was exactly, but I knew that I wanted to try something that was not traditional big law. And I still remember this very clearly because I ended up going into a plaintiff's firm. I moved to California, went to a plaintiff's firm.
All right.
But the reason I chose plaintiff's practice is because I think there were a lot of reasons why I thought it could fit well with my personality. What I didn't realize is that plaintiff's firms are very different than large defense firms. The plaintiff's firms are heavily designed around a main named partner. And so it was just a very different environment. And because I had moved from New York to California at the time, I was still pending my California license. I felt like there was a lot happening at work, and I couldn't do it because I wasn't licensed yet. I could only do the background work. And there were a lot of reasons like why, I ended up not being successful at that job. I did enjoy it. I did get an exposure to a lot of different things, and I learned about how technology could fit into the practice, which I'll talk about in a second.
Yep.
But long story short, I spent a year there, and I wasn't a good associate. They let me go. They fired me. And, I've written about this publicly before too, so it's not total news, but, it just showed me that, I tried the big firm thing. I didn't like it. I did okay at it, but I went to a plaintiff's firm, and for many reasons, I was unsuccessful. And so at that point I thought, okay, well, big firm didn't work. Small firm didn't work. Let's do my own thing. I'll start my own firm.
Right.
So this was like maybe 5 years out. I decided to open my own firm. And it was a lot of fun because I could do whatever I wanted. And I found that I gravitated towards sales and marketing more as opposed to working on matters. But for a lot of different reasons, like it was a struggle to get clients and specialize. And within a year, I realized, hey, I would be better off literally probably making a minimum wage at a regular job than I am at this thing because I was losing money. I was investing whatever money I earned into, more sales and marketing. And I realized, all right, I don't think this is working out. So there I was, like, I think 6 years out by then, closed down my law firm, had just been fired from a job, just 3 or 4 years before, had worked at Sullivan and Cromwell in New York and had clerked for a federal judge. And I thought, wow, I really messed this up. I threw away everything I had on my resume to fail two consecutive things. I have no idea what I'm going to do next. And so that was kind of where I was facing 6 years out of law school.
Absolutely. Now, of course, this is why I love this story, and this is why I love this entire journey, because that's not the end of the story. Instead, it's the beginning of a really interesting journey. I want to ask you, so interiorly, of course, exteriorly, there's the firing, there's the flame out on your own law firm. I did the exact same thing. There we go. The beginning of the hero's journey, the second part of the hero's journey starts with the hero sort of running into a kooky character that shows him or her a bigger frame. Now, if this is Star Wars again, Luke runs into Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is just like a kooky guy in the desert, and he's kind of like, I'm not sure, there's something about him, but he's expanding the frame of what's possible. Now, I always ask this question, and everybody says, well, I didn't have a mentor, but it can be bigger than a mentor. It's just an expansion of a frame from the perspective of an idea, what's possible. In my case, it was getting on LinkedIn and seeing all of these innovation people who were just doing innovation things. Did something like that happen as you sort of leave this? You're sort of down, you don't know, but you run into something or someone that sort of expands this frame, and you start to think, wow, maybe sales, maybe marketing, maybe legal tech. I'm kind of feeding you the thing, but yeah, tell me.
Yeah, sure. So when I left, when I was 6 years out and I basically had nothing to do, I thought, well, where could I deploy my skills? Like, I need a job. And so the first thing I thought of was, oh, well, I should work for a tech startup, because I was in the Bay Area. At that firm previously, I mentioned I got exposure to cloud-based e-discovery. So, I'd used Doc Review at S&C, and it was not great. The software was kind of bad. But at the plaintiff's firm, they had this like really great software to review documents for litigation. I thought, hey, I know how that works. I could potentially work for one of these startups that does that. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
I worked for a cloud-based e-discovery company called Logical. They were very early stage. I think I was employee number, 30 or something like that. I forget the exact number, but it was small. It was right before they raised the Series A. But if you're talking about the characters I met there, it's probably a composite.
Yeah.
And the character would be the quintessential tech bro.
Yeah.
I went into a startup as a former S&C lawyer, selling e-discovery software alongside 22-year-old,
right,
like fresh grads from college. My manager was, just a few years out of college and had previously sold, I think, wine. And so it was this culture of tech bros. They were all bros, by the way. It was like a whole culture around sales. And I was thinking, like, you're selling to lawyers who have a strong BS detector. Like, how could you be successful? And I think by encountering so many tech bros, seeing them be successful made me realize, okay, what's happening here?
Right.
Number one, they're all very outgoing, gregarious, and unafraid of rejection. So I realized that that's actually quite important. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. If you're able to get out there and talk to lots of people, you'll probably do well. But the second thing I realized was that, hey, I think I could do a better job than them. I think I could develop a specialty here, because I have actually worked as a litigator. I have familiarity with this industry and with this software, the Doc Review software. I think that I could probably do a good job at this. And I think so. That's like the first character, the quintessential tech bro.
Yes, right.
Which is not necessarily like a single person. I think that it was just how sales was in technology back then.
Right.
Companies and startups did not hire very many lawyers to do sales. I mean, I think Thomson Reuters probably did.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about in terms of startups, it was all people from other industries. And so that's where I started building my second career and my second act.
Yeah. So we're in the second act, and you met this composite, and I love the cognitive dissonance. It's like 22-year-old who's just like knows not a single thing about S&C, or like can't tell like Eversheds from S&C and like anything, but it's kind of working, right? In a weird way, and it's working because it's like you say, it's just sales sort of pipeline, good sales practices combined with just being in there and being in the mix. And of course, you start to expand your frame a little bit about, wow, what if I take good sales practices and mix that with legal culture and legal background? There we go. We start to have something. But inevitably, the hero, after they meet the kooky character, they walk into the forest. And the forest is basically just a metaphor of, well, it's time to go through some ups and downs, some left and rights, to kind of figure out, who am I? What's the unique thing about me specifically? If this is let's do Lord of the Rings now. Frodo is kind of just going through and trying to get to the top of the mountain, right? And going through, and Gandalf goes down because it gets pulled out by the somebody's gonna like totally like kill me about not remembering the big fire thing. But it's a lot of ups and downs, and you almost think that they're not going to make it. You want to talk a little bit about that sort of like time. So we're moving through Logical, we're moving through Eversort, and we're really sort of making our way. And inevitably, I'll ask you about sort of like social media and TikTok. But talk a little bit about the ups and downs, where you're sort of like not great, but you're also kind of invested in the idea of what this is.
Yeah, so I spent 3 years at Logical, that e-discovery company, doing really well at sales. I learned that I had a knack for it, and because I had that background as a lawyer, maybe because I just naturally was okay with bouncing back from rejection.
Right.
I just did really well. And so I think the organization wasn't quite ready to promote me as a manager. And so I went to Evisort next. There, I was able to join as the head of sales. It was a much smaller team. And so I was able to leverage my skills and jump the next level. The problem was, even at Evisort, I think there was a perception that I wasn't quite ready to take the next step as a manager. We did well in those early days, but then the company did well. Then they raised another round of funding, and then they brought in a gray-haired executive to essentially serve as this chief revenue officer. So I was kind of stuck in my individual contributor role, which I had mixed feelings about because at the time I just had a baby, and I was like, being a manager and middle management essentially would require me to do all these late meetings, and it was just a tough job. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm better off for this stage of my career to be an individual contributor and just kind of, have more free time to spend with my child and my family. Meanwhile, I also started, and I had been posting on LinkedIn since the day one of my sales career. I started seeing a little bit of an uptick in people, liking my stuff. And I was like, maybe I should explore that and try to post more and generate some leads there and socially sell there, do business development. And so I remember, and this was in December, it was December 2019. I decided that in 2020, I would post once a day on LinkedIn. I would go crazy with it and see how far it could take me. I never imagined that within a few months, the pandemic would hit and everyone would jump to social media. And so what ended up happening to me was I was an individual seller, but because I was at the right place at the right time, my follower count on LinkedIn exploded. And so I became suddenly well-known among many people, and I drove a lot of leads to Evisort. I drove a lot of awareness of the brand for our company. And so I saw this thing that was like really, really taking hold, snowballing. And so I thought, okay, let me just kind of double down on this. And that's when I tried out something very uncomfortable for myself, which is to do more marketing. And I started creating these video skits, funny video skits about the practice of law. And that's when I think I truly went viral, and that changed everything.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get to the end of the second act where inevitably the hero has to kind of, it's a big metaphor, but face the dragon. And of course, the dragon is just the thing about yourself, the limiting belief about yourself, or the change that you inevitably need to kind of change and go through and get out of the forest. We're going to get there, but I wanted to, this is always my favorite question because, again, let's go back to Lord of the Rings. Of course, in Lord of the Rings, there's a fellowship of the ring that kind of comes together to help Frodo sort of get through. And I always like to ask this question because it's the most woo-woo question that I ask. But, I deeply believe in this, like we're all going through the same journey, just completely individual. But, that we're never alone in this journey, especially whenever you're sort of going through. There's just circumstances and people and situations, and I think you just described it a little bit with TikTok, just random things that happen that are just too strange to kind of be coincidence that you're like, why? Talk to me a little bit more. In the case of Frodo, it's the Fellowship of the Ring kind of coming in, and he has the Hobbit and the Elf and and in Star Wars, of course, he's meeting Han Solo and Chewbacca and Princess Leia and all of this. So something comes together, a series that sort of makes it like you're not traveling alone. You talked a little bit about the pandemic, specifically TikTok and everybody coming in. Were there any other situations that kind of came together where you were like, wow, that's random, but it like was totally helpful,
Yeah, there were a lot of things. Going viral meant that, and having followers meant that I could spin up communities very quickly. And so for a while, I think for a year, during the first year of the pandemic, I started hosting these meetups. And so I got to meet a lot of people, got to know a lot of people. And that was also around the time I started experimenting with all sorts of different internet channels, like Clubhouse, where I think you and I first met. Yeah. If you remember that, it was 2020. Totally. I was just experimenting with a lot of stuff, but the upshot of all of that was that I got to meet people from all over the country, of varying levels of seniority. And so I started to develop my own tribe that later was invaluable in supporting me as I moved ahead. But I was doing so many different things during, that 2020, 2021 timeframe. Somewhere along the way, because I was good at getting people together digitally. And part of the reason why, partly because I was generating a lot of funny TikToks that were going viral among in-house lawyers. I was recruited to Ironclad to essentially leave sales and do a community role or a more marketing type of role. And so from there, I got to meet even more people, got to develop my craft. And something I did back then that I didn't realize would be so consequential was I started writing more about sales and marketing to legal. Like I was starting to see the bigger picture, and I wanted to share my expertise somehow, because I was quickly becoming a cartoon character. I was becoming this like TikTok character, this internet personality that I, had mixed feelings about. So I was like, I want to write about the substance behind sales and business development. So I started a Substack newsletter, started writing about that and, my career journey, just wrote a lot of things, but basically sharing more depth and more substance. What I didn't realize was that a good number of people were reading that. And that's actually how I ended up stumbling into Latitude in my current role, because the CEO started reading my content around sales and marketing. And I think he had the foresight to say, hey, this Alex character is not just a TikTok guy. It's, he's got some sales and marketing experience that we could benefit from. And so